What's up, Inspired Vision 8th grade? This is Mr. Sonne. I know I'm not your normal math teacher, but the math team at Inspired Vision is trying to help you guys get ready for your important STAAR test. So you're probably watching this video with any of our math team teachers. So at any point, if I'm going too fast, please stop the video and ask for help. So here's how this is going to work. You have a packet in front of you given to you by another teacher. You need to try to answer these questions before I explain the answer. But if you need to listen to the notes all the way through, just know that you probably want to redo the question again later so you can get the question on your own. Otherwise, again, we're trying to get you ready for STAAR. By the end of this week, all 23 questions in your packet, you need to turn it in with notes, with the answers to your teachers, so you can get a good grade for this packet. Now, this video will be in two parts. Questions 1 through 11, I'm going to name our Prep TEKS 87 Part 1. Questions 12 through 23, it's going to be a different video. It's going to be part 2, same title, part 2, both of them here on YouTube. All right, let's get started. Your first objective is to solve with volume that has cylinder, cones, and spheres. Now, every single question we're going to make use of that 8th grade math chart that you have at the front of your STAAR test. So on every question, I'm going to be asking us what formula should we use to get started. And here is your first question. Now this is dealing with what type of shape? Now, it is dealing with a cylinder, and since it's dealing with a cylinder, we are going to not use this cylinder question because it wants volume. So we got to look underneath volume on the math chart, and we see cylinder, and we see right here volume is base times height. Now that is very important to do this question. So the first thing you need to write for this is volume equals base times height. Now we have an additional question to answer. This B, we got to figure out what type of shape makes the B. And the type of shape that makes our B is a circle. A circle is using the equation pi r squared. So instead of B, I need to rewrite this formula with pi r squared. That is my B, and I still have my H. So our new volume formula is basically this. Now the reason why that's important is because not all the time do we have a circle making up our base. Sometimes it's a rectangle, sometimes it's a triangle. So the first question we have to ask ourselves is, what type of shape makes up the base? Now the next question we have to ask ourselves is, what is the radius? Now, in our problem, the radius, looking at our base, and this top part is the base, our radius can only go from the middle to here. So it's basically half of the length from here to here. Well, if it's half of the length from here to here, then our radius is going to be 12 divided by 2. What is 12 divided by 2? That is 6. Okay, so let's finish off this question. Our volume, we're going to need to remember that pi is 3.14 approximately. Our radius is 6, and then we have to square it because that's what the formula says. And then we have to multiply by the height. The height is going up and down. This is our height, which is 9. Now, on your STAAR test this year, you are given a calculator. So let's make full use of this calculator. You can type in all of this all at once, but you see how I use parentheses for each number that we're plugging in? Let's type that in our calculator using parentheses for each number. So here's what I need you to do. Turn your calculator on, type in parentheses 3.14, close parentheses, another parentheses side by side. Whenever you have two parentheses side by side, that means multiply. Close parentheses after you write 6. Then to do this little 2 right here, you need to hit the x squared key. The x squared key is right by the 7 on the calculator. It's a little bit above the 7. So hit the x squared key. Now you have x squared, and then finally times 9. Now if anything I said does not make sense, you need to stop the video and ask the teacher in the room for help to help you type this in, because this is very important. So type this in your calculator. I'm going to pause for a second. I need you to get this answer. Now, you should have gotten 1,117.36. Now, that is not one of our answer choices. However, it does say which one is the closest. The reason why our answer doesn't match up exactly is because we use 3.14 for pi, and that's an approximation. So the one that is the closest is C. Okay, covered a lot of the little things here, so hopefully if this was hard for you, it's going to get easier as we go on. Next question. Here's number 2. First thing we got to figure out is what type of shape are we talking about? And the shape that we're talking about is, underline that keyword, a cone. And we are also talking about volume. So let's look at our math chart. For cone, for cone, we're talking about volume is right here on the math chart. So you got to go to volume, got to go over to cone, and that means we're using the formula. Volume is 1/3 your base times your height. So that's first step. Second step, we got to figure out what type of shape is the base. Now, it's talking about diameter here, and that is directly talking about the base. We only use diameter when we're talking about circles. So since it's talking about a circle, we need the area of a base. So circle right here is pi r squared. So this is going to be 1/3, and then multiply by pi r squared times your height. Okay, next we got to figure out what is r in our problem. The only thing we're given is the diameter. Diameter is the whole thing, so the radius is half of the diameter. So we need to take that 8, divide by 2. That's how we're going to find half of it, and that is 4. Alright, we have everything we need to finish this question. This is going to be a lot of things, a lot of numbers we're going to plug in, but let's start with this 1/3. Whenever you have a fraction in the calculator, or you're typing it in the calculator, it helps to put it in parentheses. We got to remember that pi is 3.14. then, and I'm using another parentheses because we got to multiply all this. Our radius, we just figured it out, is 4. We're going to have to use our squared key, and then our height is right here in the problem. It says 10. So notice how I'm using parentheses for each one of these numbers we're plugging in. This will help us stay organized when we get our answer. Alright, type all of that in your calculator. I'm going to wait for a second to see if you can beat me to this answer and get it right. Okay, hopefully you already have the answer. Remember this little squared key, you're using that little 2 is not times 2. You have to use the x squared key. This is the most important thing to remember when typing all this in, because it's an exponent. Alright, hopefully you typed it all in your calculator and you have the answer, which is 167.46 repeating. Now that is not one of our answer choices. However, the one that's closest to it is F. Okay, moving on. Number 3. First question you need to answer, ask yourself as you're looking over this question is, what type of main shape are we talking about? Circle that key word. And the shape that we're talking about is a cylinder. That is the key to this problem. And we are doing volume. So we need to go to volume on our math chart and look up what it says for cylinder. And volume is right here. What it says for cylinder is volume is base times height. So the next question is, what shape is the base? Now remember, the base is just like what your shape is sitting on. So the base in this case is sitting on a circle right here, and the base is the same thing as the top. So those two that are just shaded in, that is your base. Your base is a circle. So since it's a circle, we got to use right here area of a circle. So we're going to use for the base pi r squared. So our volume is now pi r squared times the height. The height is how going up and down, so this is the height. Okay, we only have to answer one more question and then we have everything we need. We need to figure out what the radius is. Now the radius is half of the diameter. In this case, our diameter is going all the way across, so we got to take this 18 and divide it by 2. Now if that 18 was only going halfway, then that would be the radius. But since it's going all the way across, we've got to divide it by 2. So we do 18 divided by 2 to be 9. Okay, let's plug everything in with parentheses. So this pi use 3.14. This radius use 9. We're going to have to square it, so put a little 2 right there. And then our height, which is 60. So notice that we had 3 things to plug in, so I have 3 things in parentheses. If you stay organized like this, I promise you will not make mistakes. So get this answer. Okay, you should have gotten the answer of 15,260.4. Now that is really off in our answer choices. So the reason why it's really off in our answer choices is because they use the word estimate. So what we could do is redo this problem without using the decimal 3.14. They could have used 3 like this. So they rounded. Estimate usually means you don't use decimals, you round your decimals. So they probably did this to estimate it. So if you want to type that in your calculator, you'll get a better answer. Or you need to see which answer is closest to this. And that answer is C. Okay, moving on. Next question. We have a new shape in this question. This shape is what? This shape is a sphere, and it's talking about volume. So let's look at our math chart. Sphere is right here. Volume, that's a formula we haven't used yet. So the volume is 4/3. And remember what I told you about writing fractions? It's good to keep them in parentheses. I'm going to go ahead and put that in parentheses so we don't have to remember to do that later. Then it says pi, which we'll fix that in a second to be 3.14. And then the radius. And then it has a little 3. That radius means it's cubed. So our answer, or sorry, not even ready for that yet. We need to figure out what is R. And R stands for radius. Now, here's something very different that's happening in this problem that we didn't have to worry about before. Look at prism. We have this big B in the formula. Look at pyramid and cone. We have this big B in the formula. This time with sphere, we don't have a B, so we don't have to answer the question of what is the base. Because a sphere, if you think about like a basketball is a sphere, it doesn't have anything that it sits on. It just keeps rolling. So we don't have to worry about the base here. But we do need to worry about this radius number. And we have something that looks kind of confusing that it says is the radius. Now the easiest way to handle this question, we can turn it into an improper fraction, or we can turn this into a decimal. The way we turn it into a decimal using our calculator is to type 1/8 into our calculator. So you just worry about this fraction part that's giving you the biggest headache. So if you type 1/8 into the calculator, you get 1.25. That means 1/8 is 0.125. Now see how it has a 2 in front? That means I want 2 1/8 to be 2.125. So you just put the whole number in front of your decimal. Okay, now we have everything we need to finish this question. We need to start it off with 4/3. We need to plug in what pi means. It's 3.14. And then we need to plug in what radius means. Our radius is 2.125. And this time we have a little 3. Little 3, we don't use the x squared button. Can't use the x squared button here. This time to do the little 3, we're going to use the up arrow button, which is right above the division key. And then we're going to type in 3. So here, I'm going to read out what you need to type in, and then I'm going to give you a second to see if you can get this answer. So we have 4/3. You type that in your calculator, open another set of parentheses, times 3.14, close that parentheses, then another parentheses, times, because the parentheses and parentheses mean time, 2.125, close that parentheses, then you hit the up arrow after you close this parentheses right here, up arrow, and a 3. That's how we're going to do the exponent. So you should see it smaller in your calculator. After that, you can hit enter and get your answer. Okay, our answer is 40.17. Okay, now, here's what's weird about this question. This question says estimate. What that means is, remember how last time on the last question it said whenever they use estimate, they took out the decimals? That means they probably did this. So they did 4/3 instead of 3.14. They did probably 3 instead of 2.125. They probably did 2 to the 3rd power. Let's try this. Since our answer is that far off, let's try this. So let's try 4/3 parentheses 3 parentheses 2 to the 3rd power. If you type this in your calculator, you should have the answer of 32. Okay, so this, gotta love the random bell. Okay, so this is our exact answer. This is our estimated answer of 32. And now we can say the answer is F. Okay, next question. This time, we want to know what type of shape. And we have this weird looking word right here, but this just means cone. And anytime you see something that looks like an ice cream cup, that is a cone. Think of ice cream cone. So let's look at our math chart. We see cone right here. So we have to use the equation. Volume is 1/3 base times height. Then we got to think, or remember, our first step here is what shape is the base. Our base is whatever it sits on. Our base, if we turn it upside down, it could sit on that. So our base is the top, which is a circle. So again, circle, we got to remember area is pi r squared. So that means our equation is volume is 1/3, put that in parentheses, pi r squared. So instead of the b, we write pi r squared. And then we got to figure out the height. Okay, now, second step is to find r. Now, r is half of the length of the circle, basically, but I'm just going to write circle here. And if you notice, this 4.5 does not go the whole way. So do we have a diameter in this problem, or do we have a radius? We have a radius. So that means our R is 4.5. So let's catch up. Our volume is 1/3. We plug in what pi means. Pi means 3.14. Our radius is 4.5, and we're going to square it. But then we need to figure out what the height is. Remember, the height has to go up and down. So which one of these numbers is going up and down? Is it the 6 going up and down, or the 7.5? Well, the 6 has dotted lines going straight up and down, so the 6 is the height. So then we multiply by 6. Okay, type all of that into your calculator. Remember, when we get to this squared key, we either need to use x squared, or you can use the up arrow with a 2. It's just you got to be careful when you multiply times 6. You got to actually get out of the exponent by using your down arrow after it. So it's almost easier just to use this key whenever you see something squared. But anyways, let's see if you got this answer. You should have gotten 127.17. If you didn't get that, raise your hand, because we got to get your calculator skills good, and someone in the class can help you get that. Okay, next. All right, number 6. Number 6, we're talking about a water heater. And this question looks a lot harder than it really is. So we got a water heater, and in the water heater, it's talking about this drain pan that's right here. And then it wants to know how much water can be in the drain pan. So max amount of water in the drain pan. Oops, I did not do a very good job underlining that. Okay, max amount of water in the drain pan. So let's just focus on what I shaded in right here, and then I'll explain the rest of the question. If we just focus right here, we got to think, what type of shade is the pan? The pan is a cylinder, so we're going to use this formula again. Volume is base times height. Okay? And then the base, this base, because that's always our next question, figure out what the base is a circle. So instead of a B, we need to use pi r squared. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to talk about the pan over here. Our volume of the pan is pi r squared times our height. And if we finish this off, we need to figure out what the radius is. Half of the diameter. If we take half of the diameter, that's 22, which is the whole thing, divided by 2. Our radius, here, let me write it over here too. 22 divided by 2 is 11. Our height is what goes up and down, is 2. So here is the volume of the pan. We got to know what pi is. Put that as parentheses 3.14. Our radius, which is 11 squared, and then times our height. Now, let's get that answer real quick, and then I'm going to explain what else is going on in this question. Okay, you should have gotten 759.88. Now I'm going to change colors for a second, because we got another part of this question. This whole thing from here to here, this shaded part is the pan. But it's talking about putting the water heater, so I'm going to say this is the heater, is inside the pan. That means we got to figure out how big is the volume of the heater. So we're going to do another formula. The heater is also a cylinder, so the volume is pi r squared times the height. Then the r in this problem, we have to look up here at the top. The radius is half of 18. So that means we have 3.14 for the pi. The radius is 9 squared. And the height is, again, we're only talking about this section, so the height is 2. So that's probably the hardest part of this question, to figure out what the height of the heater is. We're not talking about the height of the whole heater, only the part that's sitting in the pan. So if we figure out this answer, you have 508.68. Okay, to finish off this question, you need to subtract this inside part of the heater because water can't go right there. It only goes on the outside. So to finish off this question, we do 759.88 minus 508.68. And that is 251.2. Okay, so which answer choice matches up best to that? That would be C. All right. Next question. I'm actually going to change my mind here. I don't want y'all to get too tired. I'm going to change my mind here. We are going to stop this video at number 7. These problems are a little bit intensive, and I can tell you guys are getting a little tired. So we're going to stop it at 7, which means you're going to have to look for part 2 and part 3 of this video to finish off the packet. But now that you're excited that this is the last question, let's finish this one off. First thing we need to do when reading this question is what type of shape. And we see here we have a cone. They also use the word estimate here. Now remember, estimate, they round decimals. But since we have a calculator, we're going to figure out the exact answer, and then we're going to figure out what they want it rounded, so we can determine between the two answers which best one to use. So let's look at cone on our chart. Since they're talking about volume of a cone, bam, right here. Volume is 1/3 base times height. When doing these questions, we need to know what shape is the base. If you remember from our last question, a cone is supposed to look like an ice cream, well, something you put ice cream in. So our base is this circle that if you turn the cone upside down on, it can sit on. So since it's a circle, since our base is a circle, let's use this right here for circle, which is pi r squared. Alright, so let's finish off this formula. It's 1/3. Sorry, I didn't mean to put a parentheses there because we don't know what those numbers go in yet, so we're just going to write pi r squared h. I don't like to put parentheses here until we know what the r is and what the h is. So if we keep reading the question, it says the radius right there. So hey, they made that easy on us. We don't have to figure that out. So it's 1/3. We plug in 3.14 for pi, and we plug in 1.9 squared for the radius. Finally, if we keep reading, it has a height of 15. Alright, now, when we get this answer, which is what I want you to start off with, remember, this is the exact, or closest to the exact answer we can get. So let's get that first. We have 56.677. Okay, that's the exact answer. If they rounded it, they would have said, let's round that 3 to be, so let's say this is the estimate. Still use 1/3. Then they would say this 3 round is here, round it to 3. That 1.9, it rounds up to 2. And then we have 15. Let's get this estimate answer too, and that way we can best pick our answer choice. And we have 60. Now notice both of these answers, they're pretty close together, so it's just good to double check it, especially since I said the word estimate, and our answer is A. Okay, I'm going to stop the video here. Thank you for taking really good notes. Hopefully this makes sense, and I will see you next time.